The crystalline spires of Fort Aurora gleamed in the triple sunrise of Nexus Prime, casting prismatic shadows across the assembly grounds where recruit Jasmine Torres stood at attention. Her dark eyes scanned the alien architecture, analyzing every detail just as she'd been trained. After 6 generations of humanity proving themselves to the Galactic Defense Force, she was part of the first class of human cadets allowed to train at the elite military academy. Behind her, Marcus Okonjo shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, compensating for the station's artificial gravity that felt like a gentle breeze compared to Earth's pull. They were part of a 4-person team selected from Earth's best military academies, chosen not just for their physical capabilities but for their ability to think beyond conventional warfare. Commandant Vyx Thal, a towering arthropodian with iridescent armor plates, clicked his mandibles in what Torres had learned was disapproval. The human contingent continues to surprise us, he announced to the assembled cadets from 30 different species. Their insistence on participating in the upcoming Crucible Games is unprecedented. No species from a Class 12 Deathworld has ever qualified. Torres maintained her stoic expression, though inside she smiled at the familiar prejudice. The aliens still couldn't wrap their multiple sensory organs around the fact that humans hadn't just survived their deadly homeworld, they'd thrived there. Permission to address the assembly, Commandant, came the steady voice of Raina Patel, their team's tactical specialist. At the arthropodian's reluctant nod, she stepped forward. The other alien cadets instinctively moved away, their environmental suits humming with increased power, as if humans were radioactive. The Treaty of Seoul explicitly states that any species meeting the physical and tactical requirements must be allowed to participate in all GDF training exercises, Raina stated, her voice carrying across the chamber. We've exceeded every benchmark. The 4th member of their team, Daniel Zhao, stood quietly analyzing the other species' reactions. His cybernetic eye, a replacement after a training accident back on Earth, recorded everything for later analysis. They'd spent months studying alien psychology, physiology, and tactical doctrine. While the other species saw humans as primitive bruisers who somehow stumbled into space, humanity had been preparing. Indeed, Vyx Thal's translator crackled. You have qualified. Technically. The Crucible Games begin in 3 cycles. 20 teams will compete in simulated combat scenarios designed to test strategic thinking, tactical adaptation, and adherence to civilized warfare protocols. Torres caught Okonjo's subtle hand signal, the same one they'd used during their survival training in the Martian outback. The aliens were underestimating them again. Perfect. The assembly dispersed, each species returning to their environmentally customized quarters. The human team gathered in their high-gravity, toxic atmosphere chamber that felt just like home. They've scheduled us against the Arxer team first, Zhao reported, projecting the tournament bracket from his cybernetic interface. 6 arms, natural armor plating, and a superiority complex bigger than Jupiter. Good, Torres grinned, pulling up their custom training simulations. They'll be expecting us to rely on brute force. Speaking of which, did anyone else notice how they've designed the combat areas? Patel nodded, her fingers dancing across a holographic display. Standard GDF protocols. Segmented environmental zones, varied gravity wells, and atmospheric barriers. They think they're handicapping us. They forget that humans evolved on a planet where you can freeze to death and get sunburned on the same day, Okonjo chuckled, checking their modified combat suits. Every environment they consider extreme is just Tuesday on Earth. Torres activated the room's secure privacy field, another gift from their paranoid alien hosts. Time to review Operation Thermopylae. The Games Committee approved our equipment list without understanding half of what we submitted. They were too busy wondering why we didn't request gravitational stabilizers. The team gathered around the tactical display as Torres outlined their strategy. They had 3 cycles to prepare, to show the galaxy why humans had not only survived but thrived on their deadly homeworld. The aliens expected simple brutes with primitive survival instincts. They would show them what centuries of warfare, adaptation, and innovation had created. Remember, Torres concluded, they're expecting us to follow their playbook. To fight the way they've fought for millennia. She smiled, a predator's grin that would have sent chills down any Earth-evolved spine. Let's show them how humans write their own rules. The first shots of the Crucible games wouldn't be fired for 3 more cycles, but the real battle, the one for respect and recognition, had already begun. And humanity's representatives intended to rewrite the galaxy's definition of warfare, one surprised alien at a time. The Crucible Games arena sprawled across an artificial asteroid, its interior carved into a labyrinth of combat zones. Torres led her team through final equipment checks as the countdown timer pulsed overhead. The Arxer team is positioning exactly as predicted, Zhao whispered, his cybernetic eye scanning through the environmental barriers. They've split into 3 combat units with 2 defenders at their command node. Patel finished calibrating their modified combat suits. The aliens had approved them without realizing that environmental stabilizers were actually multi-purpose tactical systems inspired by Earth's Special Forces gear. They're using standard Galactic Defense Force formations. No imagination. The starting klaxon echoed through the arena. Immediately, the other teams began their carefully choreographed maneuvers, millennia of tradition guiding their every move. The human team stayed motionless. 5 minutes, Okonjo murmured, monitoring the alien communications channels. They're already wondering why we haven't moved into the acceptable combat zones. Torres activated their first surprise. The atmospheric regulators, in their suits began venting carefully calculated mixtures of Earth-normal air. To the alien sensors, it looked like equipment malfunctions. In reality, they were creating a toxic barrier that no other species could cross without heavy shielding. Arxer scout team approaching, Zhao reported. They're using the high-gravity zones for cover, thinking we'll be slowed down. His cybernetic eye tracked their heat signatures through the barriers. Torres gave the signal. The team split up, moving in patterns that would appear chaotic to any observer trained in traditional galactic warfare. They weren't following any of the standard formations taught at the Academy. Instead, they moved like their ancestors had on Earth's ancient battlefields, adapting, improvising, striking where least expected. The first Arxer team never saw them coming. While the aliens were carefully maintaining their textbook formation, Patel had climbed into the environmental ducting, a tactic considered impossible in the high-gravity section. She dropped behind them, her suits malfunctioning, vents filling the area with Earth-normal atmosphere. The Arxer's environmental alarms screamed warning seconds before their systems overloaded. 3 down, Patel reported, already moving to her next position. Their command structure is in chaos. They can't understand how we're operating in these conditions. Across the arena, other teams were watching in confusion as their carefully planned strategies fell apart. The humans weren't fighting like any known species. They weren't following the rules of engagement that had governed galactic warfare for thousands of years. Okonjo's voice crackled over their secure channel. They're trying to adapt, but they can't break out of their traditional thinking. The Arxer commander is demanding we fight properly, in the open, following standard combat protocols. Torres grinned as she slipped through another, impossible, route, using the environmental barriers themselves as cover. Remind me to thank Sergeant Wu for those zero-G combat drills in the Amazon rainforest. Never thought tree-climbing tactics would work in space. The arena's monitoring systems were struggling to track the human team. They appeared to be everywhere and nowhere, using the supposedly deadly environmental variations as weapons. When the aliens retreated to safe zones, they found those zones had become death traps, filled with Earth-normal atmosphere that their systems couldn't handle. Command node in sight, Zhao reported, his cybernetic eye penetrating the defensive screens. They've fortified it according to standard doctrine. Double shields, overlapping fields of fire, textbook perfect. Textbook perfect, Torres echoed, for fighting enemies who think like them. She opened a channel to her team. Time for Phase 2. Let's show them why humans write our own textbooks. The remaining Arxer defenders watched their sensors carefully, waiting for the humans to attack through one of the designated assault corridors. They were about to learn that humans had stopped fighting by the rules the moment they'd stepped off their deadly homeworld. The galaxy was about to witness warfare Earth-style, where victory belonged to those who adapted fastest. And after centuries of evolving on a planet that tried to kill them daily, humans had turned adaptation into an art form. Impossible. The Arxer commander's translator struggled to convey his incredulity as Torres's team executed their next move. Instead of assaulting the command node through the designated corridors, the humans had seemingly vanished from all sensors. What the aliens didn't understand was that Earth's militaries had learned long ago that the most effective path was rarely the obvious one. While the defenders watched the standard approach routes, the human team was creating their own. Hull breach detected in Sector 7, an Arxer sensor operator reported. But there's no debris, no explosion. Torres smiled as she led her team through the maintenance shaft they'd carefully weakened. Their defective suits, supposedly struggling with the environment, had actually been precisely calibrating sonic pulses to create a passage where none should exist. Not destruction, just careful manipulation of the station structure. They still think like spaceborne warriors, Patel whispered as they moved through the gap. They never had to learn how to dig trenches under artillery fire or tunnel through mountain ranges. Zhao's cybernetic eye tracked the defenders' positions through the walls. They're scrambling to reposition, but they're following standard protocols for breach responses. Predictable. Standard protocols, Okonjo muttered, setting up their next surprise. Written by species who never had to adapt to a planet where the weather could kill you 6 different ways before lunch. The human team had spent months studying not just alien tactics, but alien psychology. Every species in the games came from worlds that were stable, predictable. Their military doctrine reflected that, rigid, unchanging, perfected over millennia. But humans? They came from a world that taught them to expect the unexpected, to improvise, to never stop adapting. Now they were applying those lessons to space combat in ways that left their opponents baffled. Phase 3, Torres commanded. Show them why Earth's militaries never relied on a single strategy. Across the arena, the team's earlier equipment malfunctions began paying off. The vented Earth atmosphere had been gradually mixing with the station's environmental systems, creating pockets of air that were toxic to the defenders but perfect for human biology. They're falling back to their emergency positions, Zhao reported. Right where we want them. The Arxer defenders, trained to protect their command node at all costs, had never considered that the node itself might be a trap. As they clustered around it, following their species' ancient battle doctrine, they failed to notice how the humans had turned their own defensive positions into a cage. Remember Lake Vostok? Torres asked as she signaled the team to take their positions. The reference to their training under the Antarctic ice brought knowing grins to her teammates' faces. Patel activated the final phase of their plan. The faulty atmospheric regulators in their suits had done more than vent Earth air, they'd been collecting data on the station's environmental systems. Now, with precise calculations born from centuries of Earth warfare, they turned the entire command node section into a zone that perfectly matched Earth's atmosphere. The Arxer's environmental alarms screamed warnings as their carefully regulated combat zone transformed into what they considered a death world's atmosphere. Their suits, designed for short-term exposure to hostile conditions, began to fail under the sustained exposure to what humans breathed naturally. Basic rule of Earth combat, Torres broadcast on an open channel as the defenders frantically tried to adapt. Control the environment, control the battle. The alien observers watched in stunned silence as the human team, moving easily through what their sensors classified as a lethal atmosphere, systematically dismantled the Arxer defenses. Every countermove in the defenders' tactical database proved useless against opponents who treated lethal environments as advantages. Command node secured, Zhao reported calmly, his cybernetic eye confirming their victory. Total time elapsed, 17 minutes, 22 seconds. The previous record for this challenge had been just over an hour. As emergency teams rushed to extract the overwhelmed Arxer defenders, Torres gathered her team. They stood easily in their malfunctioning suits, breathing comfortably in an atmosphere that the station's systems still labeled as toxic. Just another day at the office, Okonjo grinned, checking their equipment for the next round. The message to the galaxy was clear: humanity hadn't just survived their deadly homeworld, they'd learned to turn every hostile environment into an advantage. The games were no longer about following traditional combat protocols. They were about adapting, improvising, and overcoming. And when it came to adaptation, no species in the galaxy could match the descendants of Earth. The emergency council chamber of Fort Aurora buzzed with agitated voices as species representatives argued over the humans' performance. Holograms showed replays of the previous matches, with analysts trying to understand how a primitive species had shattered centuries of military doctrine. Meanwhile, in the arena's observation deck, Torres and her team watched their next opponents, the Syntherian Collective, beings of living crystal who prided themselves on perfect strategic calculation. "They've spent the last 6 hours analyzing our matches," Zhao reported, his cybernetic eye tracking the crystalline beings' light-based communications. "Their tactical computers are running billions of simulations." Patel smiled as she fine-tuned their equipment. "Let them calculate. They're still working from flawed assumptions." "Attention human competitors," the arena's AI announced. "The Games Committee requests clarification of your tactical protocols. Your methods appear to violate 17 standard combat regulations." Torres exchanged knowing looks with her team. The aliens still didn't understand that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their physical resilience, it was their ability to think beyond established limitations. Responding to inquiry, Torres transmitted. "All tactics employed fall within the fundamental rules of engagement. We simply interpreted them through Earth military experience." The silence that followed was deafening. In the council chamber, Commandant Vyx Thal's mandibles clicked rapidly as he reviewed the human statement. "Impossible," he chittered. "Their tactics show no correlation to any known military doctrine." "That's because they're not following a doctrine," a young Meridian observer unexpectedly spoke up. "They're adapting. Creating new strategies for each situation." The concept seemed to physically pain the assembled military leaders. Their species had spent millennia perfecting their combat protocols, refining them into what they considered the peak of military science. The idea of spontaneously creating new tactics mid-battle was more alien to them than the humans themselves. Back in the arena, the Syntherians had taken defensive positions that their calculations deemed optimal against Earth tactics. Their crystalline forms resonated with confidence born of mathematical certainty. "They think they've figured us out," Okonjo noted, checking their modified equipment. "Because clearly, if they can calculate all possible strategic variations, they can predict our next move." Torres activated their combat systems, but this time with a twist. "Then let's show them something their computers can't calculate. Time for Operation Chaos Theory." The team split up, but not in any pattern the Syntherians could recognize. Instead of following their successful tactics from previous matches, the humans seemed to be moving randomly, almost chaotically. Detecting confusion in their tactical network, Zhao reported, his cybernetic eye tracking the fluctuations in the crystalline being's light communications. "Their predictive algorithms are failing." The Syntherians had based their defense on the assumption that any rational species would follow logical patterns of escalation. They hadn't considered that humans had evolved on a planet where survival often meant embracing chaos. Torres led her team in maneuvers that seemed to defy tactical sense. They deliberately exposed themselves to fire, only to turn apparent vulnerability into advantage. They retreated when they should advance, attacked where defense seemed logical, and transformed their own apparent mistakes into victories. "Their tactical computers are overloading," Patel announced with satisfaction. "They can't process our illogical decisions fast enough to counter them." The Syntherians' perfect formations began to fragment as their calculations failed to predict human actions. Each time they adjusted their algorithms, the humans changed tactics again, fighting in ways that no simulation could have predicted. Basic rule of Earth warfare, Torres broadcast as her team systematically dismantled the crystalline defenses. The perfect plan rarely survives contact with the enemy. Success goes to those who can improvise. In the council chamber, the alien leaders watched in growing comprehension as their fundamental understanding of combat crumbled. The humans weren't just fighting outside conventional doctrine, they were demonstrating that the very concept of fixed doctrine was a limitation. "They're not primitive at all," the Meridian observer whispered. "They're beyond doctrine. Beyond prediction. Every battle for them is unique, every strategy evolving." As the Syntherians' command node fell, barely 30 minutes into what should have been an hours-long engagement, Torres gathered her team. They had shown the galaxy more than just human combat capability. They had demonstrated why Earth's children had not just survived their deadly homeworld, but emerged ready to reshape galactic warfare itself. The message was clear: the age of rigid doctrine was over. The era of adaptation had begun. The final match of the Crucible Games had drawn an unprecedented audience. Representatives from every spacefaring civilization crowded Fort Aurora's observation decks, their attention fixed on the arena where humanity's team faced the undefeated Nexarian champions. "Their neural network has analyzed every move we've made in the games," Zhao reported, his cybernetic eye scanning the opposition. The Nexarians, evolved from hive-mind insects, were considered the galaxy's masters of coordinated warfare. Torres watched the shifting patterns of light that indicated the Nexarians' battle meld forming. "They think they've identified our patterns. That's their first mistake. Assuming humans have patterns." Okonjo smiled, checking their modified equipment one final time. "After everything we've shown them?" In the command center, Commandant Vyx Thal supervised the final match preparations. The Arthropodians' earlier disdain had been replaced by wary respect. "The humans have demonstrated unprecedented tactical flexibility," he admitted to the assembled officials. The starting signal pulsed through the arena. Immediately, the Nexarian team moved with perfect synchronization, their hive mind coordinating every action with computer-like precision. Their strategy incorporated everything they'd learned from studying the humans' previous matches. "They're using our own tactics against us," Patel observed as the Nexarians created environmental barriers and atmospheric traps. "Or at least, what they think are our tactics." Torres nodded, activating their final protocol. "Time to show them why Earth's military history is full of successful defenders becoming unsuccessful attackers." Operation Mirror Break. The human team split up, but not in any way their previous matches had suggested. Instead of trying to control the environment or create new passages, they did something that shocked every observer: they walked straight into the Nexarians' traps. Have they gone mad? The question echoed through the observation deck as the humans deliberately entered zones that their opponents had prepared based on previous human strategies. But Torres's team had learned something that centuries of Earth warfare had proven time and again: the most dangerous moment for any force was when they thought they had their enemy figured out. As the Nexarians moved to spring their carefully prepared traps, the humans revealed their final surprise. Their supposedly simple environmental suits transformed, each member of the team suddenly operating with different capabilities than they'd shown in any previous match. Impossible. The Nexarian commander's transmission cut through all channels. Their equipment, it's completely different. Rule 1 of Earth combat, Torres broadcast as her team turned the Nexarians' own tactics against them. Never show all your capabilities until you have to. The aliens had analyzed every piece of human equipment, studied every tactic, and prepared counters for everything they'd seen. But they hadn't considered that humans would deliberately underutilize their technology, keeping capabilities hidden until the crucial moment. In the observation deck, understanding dawned on the gathered officials. Every previous match, every seemingly revolutionary tactic, had been carefully planned to create false expectations. The humans hadn't just been winning battles, they'd been setting up for this final deception. Their unpredictability, it was a strategy itself, the young Meridian observer realized. Every victory taught us lessons they wanted us to learn. The Nexarian hive mind struggled to adapt as the humans demonstrated capabilities they'd never shown before. Their perfect coordination became a weakness as false assumptions rippled through their battle meld. Command node breach detected, Zhao reported calmly. Their entire defensive strategy was based on preventing tactics we never intended to use. Torres led the final assault, her team moving with a synchronization that rivaled the Nexarians' hive mind, not through neural links or collective consciousness, but through training, trust, and the shared heritage of a species that had survived Earth's deadliest challenges. The match ended in record time, but the real victory wasn't in the speed of their success. It was in the profound silence that fell over Fort Aurora as the galaxy's military leaders realized the full implications of what they'd witnessed. "We've been teaching combat as a science," Commandant Vyxthal finally spoke, his mandibles moving slowly. "The humans understand it as an art." As emergency teams secured the arena, Torres gathered her team for the last time. They stood not just as winners of the Crucible Games, but as representatives of a species that had forever changed galactic warfare. "The games are officially concluded," the arena's AI announced. Final statistics, human team victory. Total engagement time across all matches, 2 hours, 17 minutes. Previous record, 23 hours, 45 minutes. The message to the galaxy was clear: humanity hadn't just won the games, they'd redefined victory itself. They had shown that true strength lay not in following doctrine, but in the ability to adapt, to innovate, and to turn every challenge into an opportunity. The age of predictable warfare was over. The era of human innovation had begun.